this open house is about the Northern Road Link project, and this evening we will be doing a brief presentation to provide an update on where the environmental assessment process is. My name is Qasim Sadiq. I am the project co-lead for the Northern Road Link on behalf of Martin Falls First Nation. And today we are basically here to recognize a milestone, which is the official start of the environmental assessment process provincially and the impact assessment process federally. Now I'm gonna take this opportunity to actually pass it on to Lindsay. Am I passing it on to you? So Lindsay's going to provide an overall update on the project where we are. After the presentation's done, for those of us who are in the audience right now, there's an opportunity to provide feedback, input, any comments that you might have, or to ask questions as well. With that, over to you, Lindsay.
Great. Hello. I guess I actually don't need this mic. Next slide, Ange. So we're going to go through just a little bit of background on the project. It's a proposed all-season road in Northern Ontario on Treaty 9 land. It will connect the Ring of Fire mineral deposits to the all-season road network via the proposed Martin Falls Community Access Road project and provide an opportunity for Webequie First Nation to connect to the all-season road network. The Ring of Fire is considered one of the most promising mineral development opportunities in Ontario. And the project will be subject to both the Provincial Environmental Assessment Act and the Federal Impact Assessment Act. The proponents of the project are Martin Falls First Nation and Webequie First Nation. Both are remote communities, approximately 500 kilometers north of Thunder Bay, and they both are not currently accessible by all-season roads. There's been numerous historical studies on a road to the Ring of Fire, and in 2020, Ontario, Martin Falls, and Webequie agreed to work together, and the communities agreed to conduct a provincial environmental assessment funded by the province. This map here shows the three projects and how they relate to each other. On the north end in red, you can see the proposed Webequie Supply Road project that will connect the Webequie First Nation to the Ring of Fire area and allow for economic development in Webequie through the use of by transporting people and goods from the Webequie Airport to the Ring of Fire region. On the south, you have the Martin Falls Community Access Road project. That road will connect the Martin Falls First Nation community to the all-season road network. And linking the two together is the Northern Road Link project. So that project will connect to the two other proposed road projects and thus connecting the Ring of Fire to the all-season road network. Next slide. This slide shows the project team. The communities of Martin Falls and Webequie are leading the project on a strategic level. It's being led by the communities, the Martin Falls and Webequie Chief and Council, as well as the working group. The working group consists of 2 members from each community. And then on the operational level, each community has a co-lead representing that community, Michael Fox for Webequie First Nation and Qasim Sadiq for Webequie, or for Martin Falls First Nation. And then there's consultants, Atkins Realis, formerly SNC Lavalin, and a number of other subcontractors that are doing the preliminary engineering design and environmental assessment studies. So the road is a proposed multi-use gravel road. It will range from 117 to 164 kilometers in length, depending on the road chosen, the corridor chosen. It'll have a 100-meter right-of-way. It will have numerous watercourse crossings, the largest of which is a 200-meter crossing of the Attawapiskat River, as well as numerous temporary and permanent ancillary infrastructure. One of the challenges of this project is that there will be construction in the peatlands. It's complex from both an engineering and an environmental perspective. There's a lot of risk of affecting groundwater flow and as well as disturbing the peatlands, which act as a carbon sink. So we are looking at other projects such as the East Side Road in Manitoba and the construction techniques they use to avoid impacts to peatlands. So the construction may include leaving the peat in place and building the road over top the peat rather than excavating it out. So by placing geotextile material over the peat to prevent migration of fines into the peat, and then using blast rock beneath the road to allow for flow beneath the road. So right now, we're in the process of starting our alternatives assessment and trying to figure out which corridors are best to construct the road. We've divided it into different segments so that the segments can be chosen independently of each other. Right now, there's about 12 alternative corridor segments. Each corridor is 2 kilometers wide to allow for routing around constraints within the corridor. And various combinations of segments are able to put together the full road. And you can see at the bottom, segment A1 versus A2 is dependent on which option the Martin Falls Community Access Road goes with, as we'll have to connect to their road. So the alternative corridors were originally based on, largely based on terrain, while also considering known biological and cultural constraints. A lot of the segments follow the esker. You can see this heat map shows the higher ground in green and the really wet areas in red. So you can see there's not a lot of green. So a lot of the road does follow the esker where there is higher ground. But additional corridors were developed to accommodate an alternate crossing of the Attawapiskat River. So the Ontario environmental assessment process requires an in-depth assessment of alternatives, and we have developed criteria to assess the advantages and disadvantages of each corridor segment. So based on things like engineering, species at risk, archaeological sites. So we're going to look at it from different perspectives. We actually have more information and a fact sheet at the front on all the criteria that we're going to be using to assess the road, and we're also looking for feedback on that. This slide just shows a map of some of the options for crossing the Attawapiskat River here. We have one crossing on the east along the esker, and then 2 options along the west. And we have some different options to avoid things like sturgeon spawning habitat, a moose concentration site, and cultural use sites as well. So this shows the provincial environmental assessment process. There's a planning phase and an assessment phase, and we've completed the planning phase and we are in the assessment phase. During the planning phase, we prepared a terms of reference and consulted on terms of reference for the EA. During that process, we received and responded to over 1,000 comments from various stakeholders and Indigenous communities on the project. The next slide shows the federal impact assessment process. It also has a planning phase and an impact statement phase, and we have also completed the federal planning phase and determined that a federal impact assessment is required, and we are starting that process. So this is a timeline. As you can see, it's pretty long for the environmental assessment right now. We started our baseline studies back in 2021, and we're hoping to submit the environmental assessment report in 2027 and receive a decision in 2028. So an environmental assessment is a process to predict, evaluate, and mitigate potential environmental effects of a project. It supports planning and decision making. It includes engagement with rights holders and stakeholders to inform the process. So we will be conducting baseline studies, assessing project environment interactions, and identifying ways to mitigate those interactions, as well as assessing residual and cumulative effects, and lastly, committing to follow-up and adaptive management plans. So we also have a pretty in-depth consultation and engagement program where we're engaging with 22 different communities, Indigenous communities. We have a consultation plan. We also have a memorandum of understanding with the province where certain aspects of consultation have been delegated to the proponent. All of the consultation is being documented in a record of consultation, and we're submitting regular consultation progress reports to the regulator. So the purpose of consultation is to promote two-way exchange of information. So we want to present information, but we also want to receive information. We want to use the information to identify and address issues and concerns related to the project. I think one more. So this shows some of the consultation and engagement principles as well as some of the tools we're using. The aim is for consultation to be meaningful, transparent, inclusive and accessible, flexible and collaborative. Martin Falls and Webequie are committed to carrying out a thorough and meaningful consultation and engagement process in a respectful manner that reflects Indigenous culture and traditions. And on the left, we just have some of the tools we're using in our consultation program. And I'm going to pass it over to Ange Brooks to finish the second half of the presentation.
Hello? There we go. I think it's all right, so we have a fairly robust Indigenous participation program. It encompasses employment. We employ community members to come out to help us with our biological field programs. We've got a bunch of other Indigenous subcontractors, for example, Thay Media, who's doing the live streaming and radio shows and that kind of thing. We've also hired some other local Indigenous-owned businesses. One company built our Wolverine run poles. And we frequently rent a house in Webequie, and we also do rentals in the Webequie bunkhouse. Another company that some of the community members would probably be familiar with because they came up into the community numerous times, and that's Origin. And they've produced a number of virtual reality experiences. So things like a day in the life of a biologist, a day in the life of a construction worker, so that community members can see what it's like, what it would be like working in those industries. Indigenous knowledge is another extremely important component of the project. While we are collecting, our standard biological data, like in other data, air, noise, cultural heritage, archaeology, using Western scientific methods, we also need Indigenous knowledge from the communities so that we can weave it into the EA, because they know the land better than anybody else. They know what's there, what they use it for, what the animals are, all of that stuff, the cultural sites, the spiritual sites. That's all the information that we need, basically, so we know, in a nutshell, what areas to avoid when we're deciding which road corridor to go with. Next. Valued components are components of the environment that are important or sensitive to change and are also concern and value for cultural and traditional purposes and are also likely to interact with the project. So that's a fancy way of talking about everything to do with the project, everything that we collect data for, and they're covered under 6 main umbrellas. We've got Aboriginal and treaty rights, biological, physical, human health, socioeconomic, and cultural heritage. Aboriginal and treaty rights and interests. This is, I don't know, there's 2 phases to this, 2 phases of Indigenous knowledge. So first we're collecting IK, which we're in the process of trying to gather from all of the communities. And then completing project-specific studies to collect and report on the IK, the ILRU, cultural values and Indigenous rights and interests. Our team recently sent out a memo inviting feedback from all of the communities on the preliminary local and regional study area for this ATRI assessment. So these next few slides are just going to be talking about all of the valued components. So this is just one of the umbrellas I was talking about, the physical environment. It includes things like noise, climate change, surface water, and groundwater. The biological environment covers everything from fish, birds, wildlife, species at risk. This is where we would talk about our caribou collaring study, our wolverine occupancy study. We have a whole load of acoustic recording units out for birds and for bats, and we've got a lot of trail cameras out also tracking ungulates and other small mammal use of the study area. Okay, so here we have a slide specific to our caribou collaring program. We collared 14 female caribou, and it was done using a specialized subcontractor in a helicopter with a net gun. And the caribou that were trapped were then measured. They were fitted with a collar, hair samples were taken, and blood samples were taken. And the reason why we take the blood samples is to test if the females are pregnant. And in case you're wondering, they all turned out to be pregnant. I don't know if that's normal, but they all were. And that's important for us to know because in the subsequent years, we need to do calf recruitment surveys. So we need to know whether they were pregnant or not so that we can follow them along in the next years to see how successful those calves were. And if anybody's interested in the actual caribou collars, because we've had some people a little bit concerned about them, but for the size of the caribou, it's just like a collar that a dog wears. It doesn't weigh much and it doesn't bother them. It doesn't interrupt with any of their other, normal day-to-day activities. The collar is also programmed to fall off after 3 years automatically. There's a little explosive device and then it just pops off, and we're required to go and pick them up after the fact. Two other VCs, the socioeconomic environment. This includes the local and regional economy, land use, recreation. Most of this data is collected through community surveys, which we will actually be starting fairly soon. Cultural heritage resources is where the archaeology and the cultural heritage study falls under. Human health studies, part of this information is also collected through these community surveys, just to asking community members what foods they use on the land, how they use it, what times of year, those kinds of things. We also use the results of these surveys and we sort of cross-check them against the air and noise studies and the surface and groundwater. Another component, if required, we'll be doing a country foods tissue sampling where we would ask community members for samples of, usually we get moose, mallard ducks, or grouse, and we usually ask for berries as well, and then we send them to a lab and they're tested for a bunch of different parameters. So after we completed the terms of reference and the project description, we received a bunch of comments, and some of those comments came back as, well, what we categorized as key concerns. So some of the concerns that we've heard from various stakeholders in the communities, ensuring that we have adequate consultation and participation, that we incorporate Indigenous knowledge, which we plan to do. We're trying to get the IK from the communities, as well as minimizing impacts to Aboriginal treaty rights and interests. Key concerns we heard were related to cumulative impacts. The cumulative impact assessment is required as a part of the overall EA, and it will be required to look at all different projects from this much wider geographic area. Some of the key concerns around the environment include construction on the esker, because it is caribou habitat. I mean, the whole area is caribou habitat. We've also heard that the esker is an important moose travel corridor. In the peatlands, James Bay Lowlands is one of the world's largest wetlands, peatlands in the world, and people are concerned about building on that and how it will affect the groundwater movement. And of course, the crossing of the Attawapiskat River and other small watercourses, people are concerned about the ongoing water quality and you know, what's going to happen during construction and making sure that there's no impacts to that. And a part of the terms of reference in the project description included a list of commitments and monitoring that will come out of this environmental assessment. And the commitments relate to all project phases, from construction, operation, and maintenance. And it'll include mitigation measures and additional consultation and engagement, as well as monitoring program. And depending on the permits that are required, the monitoring programs can go anywhere from 2 to 10 years. It just depends on what permit we're talking about. And so the monitoring, part of it is meant to verify the effectiveness of all the mitigation measures that we'll be applying, and also to help to determine if we need additional action to meet the project's commitments. And all of that is ongoing. A lot of that will be taking place during the actual construction period, but like I said, monitoring will continue well beyond, like well past post-construction. And I think that's our last slide. Did you want to say anything else, Cassim, or are we just gonna wrap it up? Yep, same.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Ange, and thank you, Lindsay, as well. Just want to take this opportunity to thank everyone that's come out, and for those of you who are joining us online and wondering if you still have the opportunity to come out and see the poster boards, provide comments, and ask questions, we are back here at the Victoria Inn again tomorrow from 2 to 4 and 6 to 8. Geraldton again tomorrow evening. I believe that's 5 to 7 p.m. 6 to 8. 6 to 8 in Geraldton at the Legion as well. And if you miss both opportunities and you still have an interest, our contact information is available online. You can get in touch. We're happy to receive questions by email or schedule either an online meeting or plan to meet in person as well. Okay, great. Thank you so much.